Thank you so much. So my today's presentation focuses on the translation and retranslation of Edgar Allan Poe in Romanian between literary canon and cultural reinforcement. And here we have the overview of my presentation. I will have three main points. First of all, I'll try to give a brief theoretical framework of the policy system theory. Then I'll focus on the translated literature within the policy system. And then the more applicative part, Edgar Allan Poe in Romanian translation from periphery to center and vice versa. And this is a case study. First of all, I would like to start by stating that for over a century, Edgar Allan Poe's writing have undergone numerous translations and retranslations in Romania, each shaped by the prevailing cultural and ideological frameworks of its respective period. And these successive versions illustrate the ongoing reinterpretation of Poe's authorial persona and the gradual transition of his work from the periphery to a prominent position within the Romanian literary system and policy system. Of course, our study explores translation not just a linguistic transfer from one language to another, but as a cultural and ideological act. Of course, we are interested in examining how his translation and retranslation into Romanian reflect the changing literary and political context. Our study also highlights how these versions reshaped Poe's image from marginal figure to canon author within the Romanian literary policy system, and we try to show how retranslation serves as a means of cultural reinforcement and negotiation with Western modernity. As we all know, the policy system theory was proposed by Evenzo Hart in the 1970s, and he redefined it and remastered it in other two versions. And it offers a framework within translation studies and comparative literature that conceptualize literature as a dynamic and hierarchical network made up of multiple interrelated subsystems. Within this model, translation is not viewed as a peripheral but as an integral component of the literary policy system, capable of occupying either a central or marginal position according to specific historical, cultural, and social context. I'll try to briefly present some key concepts of the policy system theory. Of course, dealing with systems, we have central versus peripheral position. Works in a central position influence norms, aesthetics, and literary evolution, while those in a peripheral position follow established norms and serve to reinforce and replicate the dominant literary culture. Translated literature also carries literary innovation because translations can introduce innovations, new genres, or narrative techniques, especially when they occupy a central position, while in a peripheral system, translation often serves as a tool for modernization or cultural borrowing. In regard with systemic interaction, in this case, literary system interacts with other cultural, social, and historical systems, while translation mediates between foreign prestige systems and local or national systems. Of course, it is very important to emphasize the role and implication of translated literature within the policy system, because translated literature is conceptualized not as a marginal or secondary component, but as a fully integrated subsystem of the target literary system. And when translation occupies a central position, it serves as a vector of innovation, introducing new genres and aesthetic paradigms. While in a peripheral position, translated literature tends to be conservative and imitate, and also functions mainly to reinforce the established literary order rather than challenge it. In a peripheral or semi-peripheral systems, translations often play a formative role, introducing canonical foreign authors and establishing narrative models for emerging local writers. Edgar Allan Poe in Romanian translation, and this is the case study of my presentation. Poe entered into Romanian literary and cultural space in the second half of the 19th century, and until today we identify three main periods. The early translation phase from the second half of the 19th century until the early phase of the 20th century. Then we have the post-Second World War and the communist era, and the contemporary translation. And this is very important because, as some critics observe, translation is a way for Romania to be oriented to the world, and by focusing on the Romanian translations, our study aims to demonstrate the extent to which a minor national imagination is, by necessity, an international imagination. And even though we have modern translation of Poe's short stories into Romanian, it is very important to emphasize the fact that no CAT tools have been used in translating him into Romanian, despite his global popularity. And most of his translations and retranslations rely on traditional manual literary translation methods. And by integrating CAT tools, we could improve consistency, terminology, and comparative analysis. And for Romanian audiences, it would support digital scholarship and enhance understanding of translational shifts over time. Even though I have just mentioned that we have three main periods of Poe's translation to Romanian, in this chart I try to summarize the main periods in which he was at his peak in a Romanian translation. And the first wave was in the second half of 19th century, when important literary figures in Romania, such as Mihai Eminescu Caragiale or Alexandru Macedonski, translated Poe into Romanian, and they translated him via Baudelaire's French text. So we had French mediation in the process, and only some of his short stories were translated. Then we have the communist era, especially the 1950s and the 1960s, when Ion Vinea was the prominent figure in translating Poe into Romanian, and he and his collaborators presented Poe's translations almost in their entirely. We had an extended corpus, and this was the period when we had direct translations from English, but they were published in state published collections. And as I said, this represents the cultural peak, because we have massive translation trend in our country. Then Poe fell in a sort of hibernation until the 1990s, when Liviu Cottrău retranslated most of his short stories, while in the 2000s he published again 2 volumes of translations and retranslations with Poliro. While more recently, we have other new translations made by Gabriel Mălescu and Dan Starcu in 2014 and 2019. But these are small scale publications and are less popular. They didn't have an important impact on Romanian audiences, and we scholars usually make reference to Ion Vinea's and Liviu Cottrău's translation, even though we have these new translations on the market. As I said, no CAT tools have been used yet in translating Poe, but we have some of his translations in the form of ebooks, those done by Liviu Cottrău. In a conclusion, we can say that the power system theory plays an essential role in shaping a varied and diverse culture and literary environment through hierarchical relationships characterized by dynamism and mobility. And bearing this in mind, translated literature and Edgar Allan Poe's works translated into Romanian as well offer a complex mosaic that brings complexity and diversity to a national culture and literary space. And as far as Edgar Allan Poe is concerned, the author on whom we focus in our research doesn't benefit from a great deal of openness in terms of digitalization, but we believe that in the future this digitalization will come about naturally, not just as a necessity, in order to adapt to the new wave of readers in Romania. This is the bibliography for my presentation, and again, thank you so much for your time and for understanding my situation.